not far away. Let's talk story. It's where my mama was born, it's where I come from, it's where my daddy fell in love not long ago.
Aloha, everyone. This is Larry Camp, and welcome to the Nobody Knows Your Story podcast, which just happens to come with a side of Hawaiiana. Nobody Knows Your Story is a podcast which I believe will impact each listener in a positive way. As you listen to the experiences that have transformed, shaped, and guided each guest, perhaps you'll better understand your own personal journey. Some will surprise, some will make you question, and some will inspire, but all will leave you in a better place for listening in. As for the Hawaiiana, well, that's just a big part of my life story. So I invite you to check in from time to time, or better still, add Nobody Knows Your Story to your list of favorite podcasts. You'll enjoy hearing the life experiences of people just like you.
Smiles on the faces of our brothers. So much trouble pushing down on people's shoulders. It's time to fill each other's cup with some aloha. They say the world has lost a lot of its aloha. No more smiles on the faces of our brothers. So much trouble pushing down on people's shoulders. It's time to fill each other's cup with some aloha. Look around, see we're living in a crisis. People struggling, fighting for survival. Single mothers and children being evicted. People fishing for housing and assistance. My head is spinning in a downward spiral. From all the trauma and the lies going viral. Seems the world kept moving on. Feels like aloha is gone. They say the world has lost a lot of its aloha. No more smiles on the faces of our brothers. So much trouble pushing down on people's shoulders. It's time to fill each other's cup with some aloha. They say the world has lost a lot of its aloha. No more smiles on the faces of our brothers. So much trouble pushing down on people's shoulders. It's time to fill each other's cup with some aloha.
Hey, aloha, everyone, and welcome to a couple of fun life stories. Yep, we've got a twofer today. Now, we just heard a fun, upbeat song from Nuff Said, Cup of Aloha. And mid-podcast, Anohia will sing Maui Rain. It's kind of a nice, mellow song for a cold, rainy day, like we have here in St. George today. Hey, once again, please support the musical artists that you hear on the podcast by purchasing their music. I try to say this at least every 2 or 3 podcasts because, well, I'm using their music, and I want to share it with everyone throughout the world because most people outside of Hawaii and maybe the West Coast don't really know much about these artists. So please support them by purchasing their music. Okay, so yeah, 2 life stories today, and my 2 guests are sitting right across the desk from me, Lorna and Jack Hoopes. So welcome to Nobody Knows Your Story.
Thanks. It's good to be here.
It is.
So what we're doing is we're going to use one microphone and pass it back and forth like we've done a couple other times when I've interviewed 2 guests at once. I think this is maybe like the 6th or 7th time I've done this, and it's kind of a fun thing for me because it's a little bit different from what I usually do. But I think, as we discussed sitting in the other room before we started this today, I think it's kind of fun because while one of you is talking, the other one's going to be probably thinking of something to say based upon what the other one is saying. So Jack, I see you holding the mic. Are you starting first, or is this just kind of a patriarchal thing where you're starting off?
No, we don't have that in our house anymore. But anyway, I think I was born first, so I guess we're starting with me.
All right. Yeah. Why don't you just talk about your upbringing, maybe where you grew up and that kind of stuff?
Okay. Well, I was born born the last hour of 1954. Didn't make the New Year's baby. My mom said she didn't want to have her picture taken in bed, and my dad wanted the gifts. And people say, well, you got the tax benefit, but we didn't because our farm was on a fiscal year that ended in February, so we didn't even get that. So anyway, I came an hour early. But I was born in Rexburg, Idaho. Back then it was a sleepy little town of just several thousand people. That was before there was BYU Idaho there, but there was Rick's College. But that was a smaller college, only had a couple of thousand people in it. And yeah, so anyway, we went to Madison High School. I have 3 sisters. I'm the only boy. I have 2 older sisters and a younger one. We divided our time up between, we spent our winters in Rexburg, Idaho. We lived 5 months of the year in Teton Valley, where our dry farm was. And so I think I had a wonderful childhood growing up. Spent the summers on the farm. We were 30 miles from town, so weren't a lot of friends around. Wasn't able to play sports or anything like that, but had horses, motorbikes, and a lot of hard work. But anyway, it was great growing up underneath the Tetons in the beautiful Teton Valley. And then in October, we would move back down to Rexburg, and I got to have more of a town life with friends and things like that. So I enjoyed my childhood. It was a good way to grow up.
I think a lot of people who've grown up on a farm or kind of farming life, moving the sprinklers out in the fields in the summer and that kind of stuff, as they look back, they do say it was a lot of fun. I'm not sure how much fun it was at the time they were doing it, but yeah, I've only visited farm life, so.
And that's surprising you brought up sprinkler pipe, because we were right in the area that did a lot of that. And even if you weren't raised on a farm, most boys at Madison High School moved sprinkler pipe. And it's hard work. We had a farm outside of Rexburg, also a wet farm which meant it was irrigated. You had to get up at 4:30 in the morning and move these pipe when it was dark out there. And going through mud, they were heavy. It was cold. It took about 3 hours to do it. Then you'd have to come back in the afternoon at 4:30 and move them again. And 6 days a week. I hear a lot of people say that, and they don't do it anymore. And now everything is automated through pivots and the circular irrigation that you see on the farms. And there's very few sprinkler pipes left. But our boys did it growing up. And even when I hear people that were never around a farm since then, they said that was the best thing they could do. I was able to climb Kilimanjaro in Africa about 20 years ago and with a couple of friends. And when it got rough up there, we'd look at each other and say, it's still not as bad as moving pipe. So it was something always to judge yourself on.
Yeah.
Like I said, I went to Madison High School.
Did you play sports?
No, I didn't. A lot of it was because we lived at the farm. There's no way that my parents would haul us there, so baseball and football were out of the question. Most of the reason why is my athletic ability wasn't quite there. I like to say our senior year, our football team, we lost our homecoming game 72-0. We lost all 6 games in football that year, and I didn't make the team. So you know where my ability was. Not really. I never tried out for it, but anyway. Did enjoy basketball in the wintertime. Never played on the high school team, but what our family did do is we did do a lot of skiing. Where we were so busy in the summertime, our whole family skied from that. When I was younger, in grade school, we would ride the bus up to a small resort called Bear Gulch, which was up in Fremont County. Then when I think I was 14, Grand Targhee in Teton Valley opened up, and we spent our high school years there skiing. Our children were raised in Teton Valley, and school there had a program where they were out one day a week to ski. We benefited from that. Also, when I think I got in about 9th grade, our family bought a boat, and we did a lot of water skiing. And so that was probably 2 things I did back then, and then later on we got into scuba diving and a few other things.
So, you say you're not athletic, but I already know that you are, because if you're snow skiing, you're water skiing, you're doing those type of things, you have to be an athlete. I mean, not everybody can do that stuff.
Well, maybe.
I guess I'm thinking to myself, I've skied a few times, and let's just say I'm not too good a skier. I do better on the wet water, not the frozen water.
Yeah, but I sure couldn't play baseball like you can, so I guess that's the difference.
That it's interesting to hear other people's upbringings, because even as you're telling your story of high school, I'm thinking back to my stuff and what I did, and those are fun times. But I'm not one who And I've never really sensed it from you guys either, that high school year was the top and everything's down from that. But we run into people like that, right? Remember the
Exactly.
the Bruce Springsteen song, Glory Days, right?
Glory days, yeah. Or going to your high school reunion, there's some people that are still living in those 3 years, 4 years.
Yeah, but it was a fun time, and I think that's where you maybe expand your social world a little bit. You start to meet other people with other views and other ideas. At least I did. Growing up there in Idaho, maybe the views were pretty similar. You could speak to that.
Yeah, I think so. I grew up in Rexburg, which highly Mormon LDS community. But I grew up with parents who were mainly inactive in the church. They were LDS, and they had us baptized. My dad did baptize me, but they were inactive. A little more, didn't agree with a few things of the church. But they knew that it was important for us socially. And so Rexburg was a great place to grow up. By the time I got into high school, we started hanging around with, there was 11 of us, and they were very good kids. We're still very close friends to this day. Probably, moved all over, but we try to get together once a year. And I think we've lost 2 of the members of that group now. But anyway, it was, high school was a great time. We had a lot of fun.
Lorna, I think this might be a good spot for you to kind of talk about your upbringing a little bit.
Okay. Well, I was born in Yuma, Arizona. And
Why are you smiling?
well, anytime that I bring up Yuma to almost everybody, they'll just say, really? Or, oh, including Jack.
Well,
It was,
you know what I thought of? I thought of you grew up in a place that was super hot, and you grew up in a place that was pretty dang
right.
cold.
It took me a while.
Say what you said the first time you went to Rexburg.
Oh, yeah. I went to Rexburg with my cousin and one of my good friends, and it was the summer of 1974, so it was the summer between my junior and senior year. And they were a year ahead of me, and they were both going to Rick's. And so I went up there with them to get them settled. And I remember looking around Rexburg, and I didn't like it. And so I said, I'm never going to go to Rick's. I'm never going to live in Rexburg, and I'm never going to marry anybody from Rexburg.
Oops.
Right. So I always say, well, two out of 3 ain't bad. So I did never go to Rick's, but when I was born and raised in Yuma, my dad came from a pioneer descendants. He was born in Gilbert, Arizona. The farm he was born on is now Elliott and Val Vista, so it's all housing now.
Oh yeah, I probably lived Elliott and Val Vista. My goodness, I live right there in Val Vista Lake, so that was right there.
That was the family farm, and he was the 8th of 9 kids, and his mom died when he was 4, and it was in the middle of Depression, and his dad was kind of an eccentric, difficult person, so he got shifted around between his siblings and aunts and uncles, and really had a kind of a chaotic upbringing. So he was, for the most part, inactive, just because of the way even though he came from an LDS background. So when he graduated from high school, after he graduated, he joined the Air Force and was stationed in Yuma the whole 4 years, and that's where he and my mother met. And my mother had moved to Yuma right after World War II with her family. And she was born Baptist. She remained Baptist for 5 years after they were married. She went through a lot of sets of missionaries, and she finally joined the church. And so then I have a younger sister, 18 months younger than me, and then a brother and a younger sister. And I had a pretty unremarkable childhood. I was happy. My parents financially were not ever really wealthy, but we had a good life. I always felt loved, and I felt like I had a lot of good experiences when they mainly revolved around the Mormon church, my social activities and acquaintances and things like that. But there wasn't a lot going on in Yuma. It just, especially for me, I'm like you, high school was not the highlight of my life. I just kind of, I think, got through it, and it was nothing negative, but nothing really positive. Just kind of, it was a thing that you did. You went to high school, you graduated.
Did you play any musical instruments or get involved in band or anything like that? Or
I
drama or anything?
I was in choir.
Okay.
And I was in grade school, I played the cello. And I attempted piano several times. And I can read a little bit of music. I like music, but I'm not good on any instruments, so.
Okay. So when you graduated high school, did you know where you wanted to go to school at that time?
Yeah. I wanted to get out of Yuma. And so I knew I didn't want to go to Rick's College, but yet there were so few LDS people in Yuma at that time that I applied to go to BYU the beginning of my senior year. And my grades were okay. My ACT was okay. But, people said, oh, you're never going to get in. You're never going to get into BYU as, right out of high school. But I did. And I got accepted. But, back then the bar was way lower.
That's why I got in.
In the mid to late 70s, they weren't very selective. But so I did. Yeah, I got in. So I went to BYU. I was started 17 before I turned 18 in December. Zero life experience on anything. I'd never been away from home. So I had a really good time. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, and we should say, too, that a lot of times members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, as they like to be known, Mormon Church, they have a few church-owned schools, and if you're an active member, and you are accepted, from a tuition standpoint, it's pretty reasonable.
Yeah.
And so for those of us, my parents both being school teachers, it was a good place to go because you were going to get a pretty good education. Of course, they liked it because you're around all other, for the most part, people who thought the same or, were LDS. And it was very, very affordable.
Right. I remember my freshman year, I think that tuition was like between $550 and $600 for the semester.
Yep.
So, yeah.
People right now are going, what?
Yeah, that was in 1975. So I think I kind of want to go back because it's kind of important. All my mother's family was Baptist. And then most of my friends at school were Catholic. So I was kind of raised not like Jack, where it was totally, an LDS community. There were very few. And I think that kind of broadened my viewpoint or my horizon by having the experiences of other religions. So.
I think for sure it does. I know that when you're around other religions and other people who think differently, well, you see things from a different perspective, and you may not agree with them, but you start to at least maybe understand a little bit, become more tolerant of other people and other people's opinions or beliefs. I experienced that growing up in Southern California. And then I also moved into a highly Mormon area of Salt Lake City to do high school. So I saw both. And I think it was actually in some ways easier for me to live my religion when I was in California.
Right.
Because I felt like I needed to kind of be an example because there was only like 5 of us in my whole school.
So, and also culturally, where we live, Yuma is right on the border. Like in 10 minutes, you can be into Algodones, Mexico. So culturally, also, I feel like I had a little bit more diversity growing up than Jack did in Rexburg.
Yeah, but Jack can speak Spanish and you don't.
Oh, yeah, but I understand a lot. I understand more than I can speak, but anyway.
Well, and you survived and got by without knowing Spanish. I tell people now, if you're going to live in Southern California or Arizona, really could be almost anywhere in America now. It's really good to know a little bit of Spanish. Well, right on. So that got you guys both up kind of to college age. I know kind of where Jack went for a couple of years anyway.
I'll let him talk about that.
Yeah.
Well, as I graduated from high school, all of my 11 friends, well, there's one of them that went with me to BYU, and he only lasted 3 weeks, then got homesick. So all the rest of them went to Rick's College. My dad, I think it was a year after that, but my dad, like I say, was inactive, and he wanted me to go to a state school. In fact, the year after, when I started my mission, he was appointed to the State Board of Education. was on that for 10 years and was the president. So when I came back and went to BYU, I think he was a little bit disappointed. And for me, it wasn't a money thing. Back then, the state schools in Idaho, you only had to pay $250, and that covered your athletic and your physical education, and the state paid everything else. So it really would have been cheaper to go to a state school. But sometimes I've said I rebelled against my parents, but I didn't rebel against them. I wouldn't trade the upbringing I had with my parents for anything. They taught us good values. They taught us integrity. They weren't active in the church because my parents really did not agree with the black ban, which was in place with the Mormon church at that time. And my mother did not agree with the history of polygamy. My mother at times taught primary and things like that. I'm really thankful for that. I was raised with a little bit more of an open mind. However, saying as great as my parents were, my dad had a drinking problem, and it wasn't like he drank around the house all the time or something like that. About once a month, he would go out on a bender. And where our farm was 30 miles from our house, my mom would wait up and wonder why he hadn't come home, wondered if he'd been in an accident or something like that. But anyway, he'd come back, I guess, about 2 a.m. This happened like once a month, and then they'd scream at each other for 2 days, and I hated that. And so I probably wanted to distinguish myself from them a little bit, and that's why me and my oldest sister, we stayed with the church, and that's one reason maybe I went to the Y. Plus, I had all these good friends that were active, and it was good. All of my friends went on missions the next year, and I said I wasn't going to go. And when I got 20, I decided that maybe I should go. Although my parents weren't excited about it, they totally supported me. I was called to Bolivia and went on a mission down into Bolivia, which was a great experience because it's the most impoverished country in South America. I really got to see how fortunate I was for being raised in the U.S. and raised in an environment that I was. And that probably, more than anything, taught me that I needed to do well in school. My freshman year at BYU, I really didn't do well. I played too much, and so when I came back, I decided, I've got an opportunity. I want to do the most I can with it.
I think you see that when you're out in these third world countries and you see how these folks are living. And even as missionaries, I'm pretty sure that you lived in places where you didn't have running water, or the electricity might come and go if you had it. Because I know that we were on missions about the same time, and I had plenty of friends that were in South American countries, and sometimes they lived in some incredible conditions. I mean, they were actually told not to even tell their parents sometimes of some of the same things that were going on because they were just so sometimes dangerous.
Yeah, that's correct. There was situations like that. And a lot of the times back when we went on my first mission down there to Bolivia, we were able to live in some nicer places, and we actually had like pensions that we lived with non-member people. So we had a little bit better then. But the people, it was, you just saw children starving, and you saw things that, just shouldn't be. And it really made you appreciate for what you did have.
And appreciate your country.
That's right.
Yep.
Yeah. Anyway, I served the mission there in Bolivia, and it was a good experience, more or less. I think a lot of people that go on LDS missions, they try to say that, but if we're all being honest, 80% of it really is not very much fun.
I was going to say 90, but that's okay.
Okay, 99.
No, but there's a little bit of fun. But I mean, when you're out there for 2 years and put you together with somebody, you don't get to pick who you're with 24/7, and maybe you don't get along. So a lot of times the only thing you had in common was the mission and the church beliefs. But it's tough. But I think as I look back on it now, I kind of relate it to somebody joining the Army for 2 years, or somebody joining the Peace Corps, or just something where you're away from home, you're forced to grow up. And I don't look at it necessarily as a wasted 2 years, since, I don't have those beliefs anymore, but I still believe like I learned a lot by being there. But I could have learned it too, like I say, in the Army or somewhere else. Exactly.
And I feel the same way. It was a pretty good time. During that time, things at home changed a lot. The Teton Dam was being built. All of our ground was up above it, and it was an area that we couldn't dig deep wells to have irrigation. So it was a great thing for our family and some of the neighbors, and my dad instigated a irrigation system which covered about 12,000 acres, and they put a lot of money into it. And as most people know, the Teton Dam failed the first year, and it failed 5 days before our system even started up. They were going to draw the water from the reservoir that it filled with in the first year. They had a heavy snowpack year. Rexburg was destroyed. Sugar City, the towns around that, was totally wiped out. And the U.S. government came back in and paid all of those people for their homes. And some people took advantage, I think, of the government, and some people probably didn't get enough, but they were reimbursed. We were not reimbursed for our irrigation system. And so we were left with all this money to put in up there and no water rights. They thought of a way that we ended up drilling wells down around the Rexburg area, which is 2,000 feet lower elevation, and you can drill wells. And they would pump the water back into the Teton River. We would take it out up above and then replace it down below. So we had double pumping costs, but it made it so we could survive. My father was on the State Board of Education at that time. He was putting this huge system in. And for as bad as my mother, because my mother grew up hating alcoholism because her dad was an alcoholic. Well, during that time, she got hooked on prescription pills and she started drinking. You know, the LDS Church tells the parents, don't let your children know everything bad that's going on. And it wasn't until 4 months before I came home from my mission that my mother wrote me a letter and said that she'd been in rehab and all of this was just a total shock to me. And they did come down and pick me up off my mission. But it sure changed the dynamics. My father was drinking worse then, and within 2 years, my parents were getting a divorce.
change the time. I'm not falling rain. It comes and it goes. Are you listening? We can change our minds, but our hearts remain. It's beautiful, but not today.
Well, I think I'll turn it over to Lorna for a minute.
Okay. So, yeah, as I mentioned, I was 17 and I lived in the dorms, and I had a great time. I look back on it now from this vantage point and I cringe because I really ate up the culture there. Now it's pretty cringy, but I met a lot of people. I dated a lot. I grew up with hardly any, the LDS Church encourages you to date people of your same religion. So I didn't have that growing up. There were very few. I could have been more discriminate in who I dated. But that was my freshman year. But I had a really good time. My grades were okay in high school, but I didn't have to study. I just was able to get through. I barely survived not being on academic probation my freshman year because I had such a good time. But it was a real growing time for me too, because I was just starting to get some life experiences and that I hadn't had. I think I grew up in a little bit sheltered in some ways in Yuma. Just not really exposed to a lot of things. Anyway, so yeah, I had came home and worked, came home to Yuma in the summers and worked. The next year I went back and they were building Pineview apartments. And so along with some of my roommates, we lived there, and I lived there for that year and then the first semester of the next year. And at the same time, Jack lived there, but our paths never crossed at that point.
And I lived there.
Did you?
I lived there in 1979-80.
Okay, well, we were
there 78.
I was there 76 to 78.
Yeah, and Judy moved in there too.
Yeah.
Wow.
In 80. Yeah, that's so funny.
So yeah, so we never met, but every year, and this to me is so odd, and I still think about it, in the dorms and every year of my college life, I had non-LDS roommates, and they were Osmond freaks, and they had come to BYU and paid the tuition, if you're not a member of the church, is higher.
Oh, yeah.
And they paid this tuition to come so that they could be in closer proximity to the Osmonds. And I was never really a big fan like that. And so that was one reason Pineview is a magnet, because it was across the street from the apartment complex that they owned and lived in. Riviera.
Yeah,
mm-hmm. And so I always found that. So I had roommates that were from Chicago that I was quite close with. And in fact, about probably, 15 years ago, we were in Chicago and I was able to meet up with the two sisters, and that was kind of fun. And they never converted. So yeah, I had that experience also of living in this totally LDS area with these non-LDS roommates. But I did better in school after my freshman year. Still had a good time. Slightly, yeah. Slightly better. Winter semester 1978, my dad asked if I could stay home and work. And it was probably for a couple of reasons. My sister was also going to BYU at the time, and I know money was tight for them. But I'd also had one serious boyfriend for about 2 years, and it was like an off and on, and it was a pretty emotional roller coaster for me. And I think he could see that, and he thought maybe he really did need me to, stay home and work. But I think also it was a good thing because it caused that relationship to end, which was, looking back from this point, extremely beneficial for me. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I stayed home and worked. I was a telephone operator with the cord board, the old cord board that you see on TV. And I did that until I went back to school in the fall of 78.
She's old.
I'm old. They were phasing out Mountain Bell in Yuma at that time, and they were moving it all to automated switching system in Phoenix. And so it was to the tail end of the cordboard time.
I was thinking of Lily Tomlin when you said
exactly. That was exactly what it was. Exactly. So yeah, that was a great experience to be able to say I did that. But then when I went back to BYU, I decided I'm going to live someplace different with new roommates. Just got rid of the boyfriend, fresh start, everything. So I decided to move into Rain Tree Apartments, and they were still working on them in construction. Didn't have furniture. They were still hadn't gone through and been signed off, but we moved in. And so classes were good. Friends were good. I was dating. And then they said, we had this ward. I knew very few people in the ward.
And I should say a ward is a congregation,
right? And they divide up these apartment complexes. Will have several of these congregations in them, and so and then they have in the LDS church on Monday nights they have family home evening, and as a family, you get together and they have supposedly a spiritual lesson or whatever, and games and treats. But then also they do the same thing with college students. They divide them into these family home evening groups, and to get together, it's more of a social thing. Like 2 apartments. What it ended up being was 2 girls' apartments and 1 guy's apartment because of the way the ratios were. And so I remember the very first time our apartment went to family home evening, it was to Jack's apartment, and that's where we met. We were in the same family home evening group. So maybe I'll let you talk now.
It was love at first sight?
For me, more than her. We became friends right at first. We'd play poker and cards at night.
With base cards.
Oh, yeah. You were rebels.
We were the devil. And so I got to know her as a friend first, and I decided before I ever dated her that she was the person I wanted to marry. From the first time I found her attractive, but getting to know her, she had more of an open mind like I had been raised with. And where that come from now, knowing her family, I don't know where that came from, but I started liking her more and more, and she lived on the bottom floor of the building right next to ours, and so I'd have to walk by their window, and one night I came by and she was making out. She was on top of another guy, just making out.
Lorna.
She was. Anyway, that was right when my parents were going through the nastiest divorce at that time. Marriage really scared me. I can remember talking to my oldest sister some. She was the other one that had a stable marriage, and she gave some pointers, and really didn't start dating until officially dating, even though we knew each other real well, until December, and by February we were engaged. I was more nervous about getting married than she was, but that was just because right then I didn't have really a good feeling about marriage for what my family was going through. You got anything else to add for that?
Yeah. Going back to when we met, we had a lot of fun. We were just good friends, but he had this like bad boy vibe or something. He wasn't. He was a good kid, but there was something a little bit rebellious, a little bit just not like the other guys that I knew at BYU. And I was very attracted to that. But I felt a real chemistry between us, and he was just really easy to be around. And the one thing I think that needs to be mentioned to show what a good guy he is his older sister and her husband had a baby in September of 78, and he was born with trisomy 18, which is pretty serious genetic condition. And I remember one of the first times we hadn't even been dating, and I passed them outside, and stopped, and she had the baby wrapped up in a blanket, and you could just see its face, and it was just a perfect little face. And I didn't really know what was, wrong. But I remember that meeting. And then as we got to date, they were in Salt Lake a lot with the baby. They were trying so hard to keep him alive and to make his life comfortable. And so they spent a lot of time in Salt Lake in hospitals, and he had a lot of surgeries. And we went up to visit one time and spent some time with them and got to know his sister a little bit. When we started dating, it was right before Christmas. The day before we both left to go back. We were going to go out on a date. And that afternoon he called me and said that the baby had died. They couldn't release the baby right then, but his sister and her husband needed to get back to Rexburg because they had 2 other kids. And so they asked Jack if he would bring the baby home with him. And so when he told me that, it's just like, there's something more to this guy. I mean, he's got a lot of a tender heart, a lot of family loyalty, and that he would, and that wasn't an easy thing to bring a little, deceased baby home with you and by yourself. You didn't have anybody else with him. And so right then I thought, I'm going to get to know this guy a lot better because there's more than the bad boy vibe. He's interesting. He's a lot of fun, but yeah, he's got really a lot of integrity and character, and that really impressed me.
And sometimes those are the things you need to know somebody for a little while before you can see those sides of things. I remember Judy saying that she would tell our daughter when she was dating or whatever, like, you need to see this person in all different kinds of situations. You need to see what happens when they're angry. You need to see what happens when they're sad. And if you just meet somebody and get engaged the next week and you're married in 8 weeks, then a lot of times you're in for a surprise because you haven't seen those things.
These qualities and attributes would come back. We went through some really hard times. Well, we have through our whole married life, and he was always been a real rock, and I could always count on him. But
not all the time. There's certain. I guess we should have listened to Judy because I don't think Lorna should have listened to Judy because I don't think she saw me mad as much as I've been since.
Yeah, but you said something key there early on, and that is you were friends before you really even started dating.
That's such a great thing.
And, I say the same thing about my relationship with Judy because, a lot of times you go out on a date and you kiss them goodnight at the first. I dated Judy like 10 times before I even kissed her because I didn't want to rush. I'd already had a relationship that went south and wasn't good. So I wanted to make sure I took it slow. So, yeah, I think that was a great thing. And I keyed in on that when you said that you were friends first.
Like I say, it was kind of I was graduating that year. I graduated on the 20th and we got married on the 21st. Worst time possible for my parents. My parents came down to the graduation, and my one sister had a Polaroid. She took a picture of my dad and I out in front of the Marriott Centers where the graduation was held, and she hands it to my dad, and he doesn't even take it. He lets it drop on the ground. And my dad was a little upset with me because I was probably taking more of my mother's side felt like she was being barely taken advantage of. She really didn't want the divorce, and she filed because the family attorney said, well, maybe that's going to shock Clint and my dad into straightening up. And my dad saw it as his get out of jail free. He was going through, turning 50 and going through a midlife crisis. So anyway, we graduated. It's how we've done our whole life. Just hurry and just push through things. For some reason, we thought we'd get married in Logan. Neither one of us, or my grandparents, both my grandparents, or one set of my grandparents had gotten married there. And
like the looks of the outside.
We liked the architecture of the Logan Temple. So everybody had to drive to Logan, and we ran up there, and Lorna should have known then because I had lost my temple recommend. I'd left it in the shirt from when I'd been in the temple before, forgot my suit. I go to the temple in my roommate's suit, which he was 5 inches shorter than me, so I kind of had these high water pants on. And Lorna should have known then what our married life was going to be like.
Oh, yeah, we're going to hear more about that, I'm sure.
And then from there, we hurry and get married, and we drive the 3 hours up to Rexburg to have the wedding dinner. And at that time, the attention, you could have cut it with a knife. Lorna's family was like an hour late to it. My parents, we were trying to sit them on each side of us, and they weren't just digs to each other. It was not a happy time at the reception. I majored in political science and international relations. I wanted to go to law school. I had been accepted into this BYU program called Washington Seminar, and it's where you go back in Washington for the summer. And I had an internship with Senator Frank Church, who's a famous senator from Idaho. And I was planning on getting married and working on our family farm for 2 months to save some money, and then we would go back to Washington Seminar and then to law school. At that reception that night, my dad came up to me and says, "I don't think you can work for me anymore." Here, we had planned on Lorna's parents had bought us tickets to Hawaii, and my oldest sister had a timeshare in Hawaii that they had never been able to go see. It was they owned the whole condo, but it was just like an investment. And so
It was in Kauai, Princeville.
And so we thought, well, what in the hell am I going to do now? And my sister gave us a credit card, and we got there, and it was came home and found jobs to work so we could go back to Washington. Spent the 2 months in Washington. I still didn't want to go home because things were still a mess at home. So the senator hired me on, and we stayed until Christmas time back in Washington. It's a time we loved living in Washington, D.C. We were newlyweds, didn't have a lot of money, but everything in Washington is free. You can go see so many things. It was a great experience.
I worked for New York Life Insurance. I found a job, and it was in Silver Spring, Maryland, and we'd drive in. We lived in Alexandria, Virginia, and we would drive in or take the bus in to the Capitol, and then I would get on the metro and go to work in Silver Spring, and I really enjoyed that. I loved Washington, D.C. I'd never been to a big city. I'd never been east of Provo my whole life. So it was really we had a great time. It was during the Carter administration, and it was at the time when they had the Iranian hostages. Mm-hmm. And so we got tickets to the Christmas tree lighting, and at the White House, and instead of one Christmas tree, it was 13 for the hostages. 50. Or however many hostages they have, I can't remember. And I don't know what we were thinking. We decided, no, we want to go home to Idaho. And so we missed that. And looking back, I wish we would have stayed because that was really pretty historical. Yes. And spending the 4th of July in Washington, D.C. was pretty amazing too. It was just a really, really fun time that we both enjoyed.
Did you have things lined up there when you left there in December? Were you going back into law school, or what did you go back to do then?
I don't know if I had anything lined up at that time. We were going to stay with my mother's. Had been accepted, but I didn't know what that. I probably figured that I was going, and I had talked with my dad then enough that he had decided to let me work for him for a while, and things were going better with him then. So that's what we kind of planned on doing. We came back, and things kind of got where they still couldn't get their divorce settled. My mother really loved the farm. She loved Teton County. She loved living on the farm more than my dad did. My dad loved our house in Rexburg more. And yet, there's a small line between love and hate. And the despite between the two of them, my dad insisted that she leave the farm, and she wanted to keep the farm together. He insisted that it be divided up. So she got a farm that we had north of Rexburg. And I ended up, still thought she was taking advantage of, and so I ended up agreeing with her that I would stay home and help her run the farm. So that's what we did. We lived outside of Rexburg for the next 2 years. That's when our daughter Hayden was born. It was a good time. I'm really glad I got to spend that time with my mother, and Lorna and my mother became very close. They were really good friends, and it was a great time, and pretty good time anyway.
Yeah, I'm a people person, and I make connections, and that's just how I've always been. And so here I am with this new family, And they're going to all these things. And then all of these people that he's known, and I start making connections with all these people. And it gets to the point where I'm telling him who these people are, or I'm reminding him who they're related to. And it's been that way ever since. And that's just because, I knew this was going to be my life. I'm probably going to live here. I better figure this thing out. Yeah, right. I did have to, I did come to love southeastern Idaho and Rexburg. And so our daughter was born there. And yeah, we had a lot of married, his friends that he talked about that he grew up with in high school. At this point, they were all married and they all lived in the area. So we had this ready-made like social group. We were all just having kids. We were young, married. And so, that was really a good time. And I think it was really a good time for Jack too. That was the first time that he had farmed on his own. Before had been with his dad. And so I think that really was really good. He had to, deal with the bank, the financing, his mother, just everything that, people, if they've never been around farming, there's a lot that goes into it. The business side it's not just going out and planting the crops. There's a lot more to it. But so I think that was probably those 2 years a good time.
So you know what I'm going to do right here? I'm going to say this is the end of part 1 of our interview today, because I'm going to make this a 2-parter. I don't want you guys to rush through your story. I think that it's very interesting. This is the time when you're kind of starting your family and different chapter of your life. Let's put it that way. So I think this is a good place to stop. So, hey, if you've been listening, then you're going to have to check back in to hear part 2. All right. Aloha.
Not far away, let's talk story. It's where my mama was born, it's where I come from, it's where my daddy fell in love not long ago. Let's talk story. Let's talk story. Let's talk story. Well,